The sad reality for the atheist movement is that it is bound to fail. And why is it bound to fail? Actually, before we go to why is it bound to fail, let's go to what Darwinism would predict. Would Darwinism predict that we would all be materialists, or would it predict we would be people who are spiritualists, who look forward to a life to come, who care about others rather than selfishly caring about ourselves? Now, we all know the answer to that. It would predict that we're materialists. Essentially, it would predict that we would be atheists. We would be people that care about our own survival, our own reproduction, and it's about me, and every other type of good or every other type of behavior that we do, it's fundamentally for our own good. But if you actually look at the reality of the data, if we actually look at people all across the world, people want to connect with God. We have this spiritual thirst. I mean, even atheists write books on things related to spirituality, like Sam Harris recently, I think it's called Awakening, his book, Waking Up, sorry. It's about trying to be spiritual. I remember a few years ago I was in High Wycombe, and there was a college, and we had to talk about Islam and faith, and there was this head teacher, and she claimed to be a spiritual atheist. I mean, what does a spiritual atheist even mean? Look, guys, what it is that the reality of human beings is that we want to connect with God. We want to show our love, our gratitude, our worship to something. And if we don't end up worshipping God, we're going to end up worshipping something other than God. I mean, look at what happened in the Soviet Union. No atheist should disagree with that, because they got rid of religion, right? They taught people materialism, taught people a hardcore scientific worldview, taught people just all about, materialism. But what happened? It collapsed as a system. And I don't mean to say that it collapsed as an economic system. I mean to say that people started going back to God, even after the collapse, even after they were brought up not to believe in God, they started to believe in God again. Why is that? Because they had to sanctify something. I mean, even if you look at while they were applying this Soviet system, they were sanctifying who? Stalin, Lenin. They were worshipping these leaders. They had their idols. They had all these types of behaviors which we would consider religious worship behaviors towards their leaders. So the fact is, you can't get rid of that worship instinct. You can't get rid of that spiritual instinct. You can't get rid of that drive that human beings have, what in Arabic in the Quran is called the fitra, the natural state that we were created in, that we want to worship God. And this is why atheism, regardless of their popular speakers, regardless of their claim on science, regardless of their books, regardless of their philosophies and their institutions and all the rest of these things, is bound to fail, because it's fundamentally out of sync with the basic human nature, which wants to connect with God. And since that's the case, it will never become the dominating force. And I know this is going to be sort of sad news for the atheists, especially the lovely atheists on this YouTube channel, but that's the reality. That is the reality. It hasn't been the predominating, the dominating force in history. And when it was supposed to be taking off in the 20th century, it flopped. And we've got this new atheist movement, which, just like the movements in the past, will also flop. But Islam, as a spiritual force, will prevail. Why? Because regardless of how many doubts these atheists try and instill in believers, the spiritual state that we were created in, it will always tell us all of this is nonsense. There is a creator who is worthy of worship, and over time their intellectualisms will be uncovered as well, like it was in the past. And anybody who believes that atheism will prevail, I want to hear from you why you think it will, because if we look at the historical behavior of human beings, it is not something which is in line with what Darwinism would predict, and it is not something in line, if somebody wants to make a prediction, that atheism is actually going to be prevalent. If in fact, if anything, it's going to be Islam. It's going to be a spiritual tradition which connects us with God, rather than a godless system which makes us no better than mere animals, just surviving and reproducing. I mean, even from an Islamic perspective, we believe animals don't just survive and reproduce, that animals actually worship God, and that animals, there's more to it than just what meets the eye. But I'm just speaking about it from a very, peasant perspective, yeah? This idea that animals are just there to survive and reproduce, at the end of the day, that's what atheism really reduces us to, right? But if you look at Islam, it elevates the human being. The human being is there for something higher, for something greater. We have hope, we have love, we have this tremendous thing to look forward to in the hereafter. And we have, I mean, at the end of the day, atheism will never make people happy. That's one thing, right? I mean, if you look at atheists, what do they have to offer? You survive, you reproduce, you're in this world, you have your ambitions, your goals, you have these things, and then you die. And basically that's it. And even if you look at what is the purpose of life, you just make your purpose as you go along. And atheists fundamentally aren't happy. They can claim to be happy, but they're not. Islam, God teaches us that it is in the remembrance of God that hearts find peace. And the very purpose of life is to actually worship God. And it's through that worship that we are actually going to find that true spirituality, that true ultimate happiness that we're looking for. And that happiness which atheism fundamentally cannot ever provide, which is why it's going to fail and Islam is going to prevail.